Hello and welcome to the Sleepy Astronomer. Tonight we are drifting back through time to explore Apollo's peaceful legacy and humanity's greatest lunar journey. From the quiet courage of three astronauts leaving Earth's embrace to the profound moment when humans first walked on another world, we'll discover how the Apollo missions transformed not just our understanding of space exploration, but our perspective on what it means to be human in an infinite cosmos. We'll explore the gentle persistence of human curiosity, the technologies that carried us across the cosmic void, and the lasting impact of those footsteps in lunar dust that still inspire wonder more than half a century later. If you're new to these tranquil space stories, welcome aboard our cosmic journey. And if you've joined me before on previous stellar adventures, it's wonderful to have you back among the stars. Tonight, we'll begin here on Earth in the 1960s, with dreamers and engineers who dared to think beyond our atmosphere and then gently follow the path of Apollo 11 from the launch pad at Kennedy Space Center all the way to the Sea of Tranquility and back home again. We'll explore not just the incredible technology that made the journey possible, but the profound human story of curiosity, courage, and the gentle persistence of those who refused to accept that the moon was unreachable. We'll discover how three humans traveling in a spacecraft no larger than a small apartment managed to cross the vast emptiness between worlds, land safely on an alien surface, and return with their pockets full of moon rocks and their hearts full of a perspective that would change humanity forever. We'll meet the thousands of people who work together to make an impossible dream into quiet reality, and we'll explore how those footsteps in lunar dust continue to inspire us today. So, find your most comfortable position, whether you're curled up in bed, settled on the sofa, or perhaps lying back in a chair by the window where you can see the moon that will be the destination for tonight's journey. Take a deep breath, and let's begin our gentle drift back through time to explore Apollo's peaceful legacy, humanity's first steps into the cosmic ocean that surrounds our small blue world. Have you ever looked up at the moon on a clear night and wondered what it would feel like to actually walk on its surface, to see Earth hanging in the black sky like a blue marble, to feel the strange lightness of 1/6 gravity, to leave footprints in dust that hasn't been disturbed for billions of years? For most of human history, such thoughts were pure fantasy, as impossible as sprouting wings and flying to the stars. But somewhere in the collective human imagination, the moon has always held a special place. It's been our constant companion, our celestial timekeeper, the subject of countless myths and stories. Ancient cultures saw faces in its patterns of light and shadow: the man in the moon, the rabbit in the moon, the jade lady of Chinese legend. But it was always distant, always untouchable, always just beyond our reach. Long before we understood what the moon actually was, people around the world felt drawn to its gentle light. Picture ancient shepherds in Babylon, watching from hilltops as the moon waxed and waned, using its predictable cycle to mark the passage of time. They created the world's first calendars by following the moon's rhythm: 29 days from darkness to brightness and back to darkness again. In ancient China, storytellers spoke of Chang'e, a beautiful woman who lived alone in a crystal palace on the moon, accompanied only by a white rabbit. On quiet nights when the moon was full and bright, people would look up and imagine they could see the rabbit's silhouette, forever pounding medicine under a magical tree. Children would point to those shadows and whisper about the lonely goddess who watched over them from her distant home. The Greeks saw the moon differently, as Artemis, the huntress who roamed the night sky with her silver bow. Some Greek thinkers, remarkably ahead of their time, began to wonder if the moon might be a world like Earth, shining with borrowed light from the sun. It was a revolutionary idea that most people found too strange to believe. Native peoples across America told gentler stories of the moon as a grandmother figure, wise and patient, watching over Earth's children through the long nights. When the moon was bright, they said, grandmother was smiling. When clouds covered her face, she was simply resting, gathering strength to watch over the world for another night. These ancient stories all shared something beautiful. They made the moon feel personal, familiar, like a friend rather than just a distant light. Even though no one could imagine actually travelling there, the moon felt connected to human life in intimate ways. The dream of actually visiting the moon probably began the moment someone first looked up and wondered, what if? But for thousands of years, such dreams belonged firmly in the realm of fantasy. Ancient Greek writers created whimsical stories about lunar voyages, describing travellers carried to the moon by giant birds or mysterious winds. Tales meant to entertain rather than seriously propose space travel. It wasn't until much later that anyone began thinking practically about how a lunar journey might actually work. Johannes Kepler, the brilliant astronomer who figured out how planets move around the sun, wrote one of the first scientifically informed stories about moon travel. Though his tale involved supernatural helpers, underneath the fantasy was surprisingly accurate thinking about what such a journey would really involve. The violent push needed to escape Earth, the strange weightlessness of the voyage, the alien view of our world from lunar distance. Jules Verne brought moon travel into the modern imagination with his 1865 story From the Earth to the Moon. Verne imagined explorers shot from a giant cannon in Florida, not so different from the powerful rockets that would eventually be needed. His descriptions of the travelers' experiences were remarkably thoughtful. The crushing acceleration at launch, the silence of space, the gradual shift from Earth's pull to the moon's gentle tug. Early movie makers loved the idea too. Georges Méliès created his famous 1902 film, showing a rocket ship landing right in the moon's eye, a whimsical image that captured something important about human nature. We've always been explorers, always imagining ourselves in impossible places, always dreaming of adventures beyond the boundaries of our daily lives. But the real shift from fantasy to possibility began with three quiet visionaries working in different parts of the world during the early 1900s. Each man, working independently, arrived at the same revolutionary insight. Reaching space would require rockets, and those rockets would need to work in ways that had never been tried before. In rural Russia, a mathematics teacher named Konstantin Tsiolkovsky spent his evenings working out the equations of rocket flight by candlelight. He realized that reaching the moon would require multi-stage rockets, vehicles that could shed weight as they climbed, becoming lighter and more efficient as they rose. His calculations, done with pencil and paper, laid the mathematical foundation for everything that would follow. In Germany, Hermann Oberth approached the problem from an engineer's perspective, creating detailed drawings of vehicles that could actually reach the moon. His work inspired a generation of rocket enthusiasts, including a young dreamer named Wernher von Braun. In America, Robert Goddard took the crucial step from theory to practice. On a cold March day in 1926 in a field in Massachusetts, Goddard launched the world's first liquid-fueled rocket. It flew only as high as a person could throw a ball and lasted just 2.5 seconds, but those seconds changed everything. For the first time, someone had built a machine that used rocket power to lift itself into the air and fly in a controlled way. Goddard's little rocket was like the Wright brothers' first airplane, modest, brief, but revolutionary. It proved that rocket flight was possible, that humans could build machines capable of carrying them beyond Earth's atmosphere. But it wasn't until the middle of the 20th century that moon travel moved from the realm of dreamers into the world of serious government planning. The key figure was Wernher von Braun, a man who combined childlike wonder about space with sophisticated engineering skills. Since his teenage years, von Braun had been sketching rockets and spacecraft, imagining expeditions to the Moon and Mars. In the 1950s, von Braun began sharing his dreams with the American public through articles in popular magazines. His beautiful illustrations showed sleek spacecraft and lunar bases, making space travel seem not just possible, but inevitable. For the first time, ordinary people could see that moon travel wasn't fantasy. It was an engineering problem waiting to be solved. Von Braun's vision was methodical and beautiful, large space stations orbiting Earth serving as stepping stones to the moon, crews practicing in Earth orbit before attempting the lunar journey, multiple ships working together to establish permanent bases on the lunar surface. It was a magnificent dream, but it seemed impossibly expensive and complex. Then came Sputnik. On October 4th, 1957, the Soviet Union launched a basketball-sized satellite that circled Earth every 90 minutes, beeping radio signals that anyone could hear. That simple beeping sound changed everything. If the Soviets could put a satellite in orbit, what else might they accomplish? The space race that followed was unlike any competition in human history. Instead of fighting wars, the two superpowers were racing to achieve the most impressive feats in space. Each achievement was a victory not just for one country, but for the human species as a whole. The Soviets took an early lead that seemed impossible to overcome. First satellite, first animal in space, first photographs of the moon's hidden far side. But their most stunning achievement came on April 12, 1961, when a 27-year-old test pilot named Yuri Gagarin became the first human to orbit Earth. Gagarin's flight lasted just 108 minutes, less than 2 hours, but it changed the world. Here was proof that humans could leave Earth and survive, that space travel was real rather than science fiction. Gagarin became an instant global hero, touring the world with his infectious smile as living evidence that humans could reach for the stars. President John F. Kennedy, facing pressure to demonstrate American capabilities, responded with one of the boldest announcements in human history. On May 25, 1961, just weeks after Gagarin's flight, Kennedy stood before Congress and declared that America would land humans on the moon and return them safely to Earth before the end of the decade. Think about that audacity for a moment. In 1961, America had managed exactly one spaceflight, Alan Shepard's 15-minute hop above the atmosphere. The most powerful American rocket could barely lift small satellites. Computer technology filled entire rooms and calculated more slowly than the modern pocket calculators, and yet Kennedy committed the nation to the most ambitious journey in human history. The moon is about 240,000 miles away, roughly 10 times around Earth's equator. The astronauts would need to escape Earth's gravity, coast through space for 3 days, land safely on an airless world, and make the journey home. Every part of this mission would require technologies that didn't yet exist. But Kennedy's words galvanized the nation. NASA's budget soared. Hundreds of thousands of people joined the effort. Engineers, scientists, seamstresses who hand-stitched spacesuits, mathematicians who calculated trajectories with slide rules. At its peak, the Apollo program employed more people than lived in many entire states. It was a national effort on the scale of building a railroad across a continent, but instead of connecting cities, America was building a bridge to another world. The early years brought both triumphs and heartbreak. The Mercury program proved Americans could survive in space. Gemini missions show that astronauts could spend weeks in orbit, that spacecraft could meet and dock in the vacuum of space, that humans could work outside their vehicles in spacesuits. But space exploration carried terrible risks. On January 27, 1967, during a routine test on the launch pad, fire broke out inside the Apollo 1 spacecraft, killing astronauts Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee. The tragedy reminded everyone that reaching the moon would demand not just courage and skill, but also meticulous attention to safety. The Apollo team used that heartbreak as motivation to build a better, safer spacecraft. Through 1967 and 1968, they redesigned everything, implementing hundreds of improvements. When Apollo 7 finally carried crew to orbit in October 1968, it proved that the new spacecraft could safely carry astronauts. 2 months later came Apollo 8, the mission that changed everything. For the first time in history, humans left Earth's gravitational embrace and travelled to another world. Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, and William Anders orbited the moon during Christmas week 1968, becoming the first people to see the moon's far side and the first to see Earth as a complete sphere floating in space. On Christmas Eve, as they orbited the moon, the astronauts took turns reading from the Book of Genesis, while Earth rose over the lunar horizon. That image, our blue cloud-swirled planet, hanging small and precious against the stark lunar landscape, became one of the most important photographs ever taken. For the first time, humans could see our world as it truly is, a small oasis of life in an otherwise empty cosmos. By early 1969, everything was ready. Apollo 9 tested the lunar landing vehicle in Earth orbit. Apollo 10 took the complete system to the moon and practiced everything except the actual landing, coming within 10 miles of the surface before returning home. The stage was set for Apollo 11, the mission that would fulfill Kennedy's promise and humanity's ancient dream. 3 astronauts, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins, would carry with them not just their own courage, but the hopes of everyone who had ever looked up at the moon and wondered, what if? From ancient shepherds counting moon phases to Kennedy's bold challenge, from Goddard's first rocket to the massive Saturn V waiting at Cape Kennedy, the dream of touching the moon had been passed through generations of dreamers and builders. Now, in the summer of 1969, that impossible dream was about to become gentle reality. The journey would begin with fire and thunder at Kennedy Space Center and end with quiet footsteps in the dust of another world, proving that human curiosity and peaceful cooperation could overcome any boundary, reach any destination, and turn even the most impossible dreams into lasting achievements. Let's meet the 3 remarkable humans who would make this journey possible, and the incredible machine that would carry them across the cosmic void. It's worth remembering that space travel, despite all its complexity and danger, ultimately comes down to something beautifully simple. People in a spacecraft applying human ingenuity and courage to push the boundaries of what's possible. Neil Armstrong, the mission commander, was a quiet, thoughtful engineer from Ohio who had already proven himself as both a test pilot and an astronaut. Picture a man who spoke carefully, choosing his words with the same precision he applied to flying experimental aircraft. He'd flown the dangerous X-15 rocket plane to the edge of space, where the sky turns black and Earth curves away below, and commanded Gemini 8, where he demonstrated remarkable coolness under pressure when his spacecraft began spinning out of control in orbit. Armstrong had a reputation for being unflappable, the kind of person who could face an emergency with steady hands and clear thinking. His colleagues often said he seemed to slow down time during crisis moments, methodically working through problems while others might panic. It was exactly the temperament you'd want in someone making split-second decisions on the surface of another world where the nearest help was 250,000 miles away. Buzz Aldrin, the lunar module pilot, brought a brilliant scientific mind to the mission. He'd earned a doctorate from MIT with a dissertation on orbital rendezvous techniques, precisely the kind of knowledge that would be essential for getting to the moon and back. Aldrin was known for his analytical approach to problems, someone who could look at complex spaceflight maneuvers and see them as elegant mathematical puzzles to be solved. His colleagues nicknamed him Doctor, Rendezvous for his expertise in the delicate ballet of spacecraft meeting in orbit. But behind Aldrin's scientific precision was someone who genuinely loved the beauty of spaceflight. He saw poetry in orbital mechanics, grace in the way spacecraft could dance together in the weightless environment above Earth. He understood that reaching the moon wasn't just about engineering. It was about humans learning to move through space as naturally as birds move through air. Michael Collins, the command module pilot, would face perhaps the most psychologically challenging role of the three. While Armstrong and Aldrin descended to the moon's surface, Collins would remain in lunar orbit, completely alone, sometimes passing behind the moon and losing all contact with both his crewmates and Earth. For portions of each orbit, he would be the most isolated human being in the universe, farther from help than anyone had ever been. Think about that solitude for a moment. Collins would spend hours at a time with no radio contact, no voices from home, just the steady hum of his spacecraft systems and the vast silence of space beyond his windows. During those periods when he passed behind the moon, he would be the only human being in existence who couldn't see Earth, truly alone in a way that no one had ever experienced. But Collins approached this responsibility with characteristic good humour and quiet confidence. He understood that his role was absolutely critical. He would be responsible for operating the command module systems, maintaining the spacecraft's orbit, and being ready to rescue his crewmates if something went wrong with their lunar landing. Without Collins keeping their home base safe and operational, there could be no return journey to Earth. Collins often joked that he was going to be the loneliest man in the universe, but he never seemed troubled by the prospect. He had trained alongside Armstrong and Aldrin for months, and their confidence in each other was complete. He knew he would be busy with navigation, housekeeping, and system monitoring. More importantly, he understood that solitude and loneliness are very different things. One is a circumstance, the other is a feeling. These three men, with their different backgrounds and personalities, had trained together until they functioned almost like a single organism. They practiced in simulators that could recreate every phase of their mission, underwater tanks where they learned to work in bulky spacesuits, and the deserts of the American Southwest where they studied geology so they could make the most of their brief time on the lunar surface. They prepared for their journey with the methodical care of people who understood they would get only one chance to get everything right. There would be no practice runs to the moon, no second attempts if something went wrong. Every procedure had to be perfect, every contingency planned for, every piece of equipment thoroughly understood. Their home for the week-long journey would be a spacecraft that was actually 3 separate vehicles designed to work together as a single system. Think of it as a cosmic ship with specialized sections, each one perfectly designed for its particular role in the mission. The command module, where all 3 astronauts would spend most of their journey, was shaped like a gumdrop and was the only part of the entire Apollo system that would return to Earth. Inside its compact cabin, smaller than the interior of a family car, were packed all the life support systems, navigation equipment, and controls needed for the translunar voyage and the journey home. The cabin was an engineering marvel of miniaturization. Every switch, every gauge, every piece of equipment had been carefully positioned for maximum efficiency in the cramped space. The astronauts would eat, sleep, work, and live in this small metal room for over a week, breathing recycled air and drinking recycled water while travelling farther from home than humans had ever gone. The walls were lined with hundreds of switches and circuit breakers, each one labelled with precise abbreviations that the astronauts had memorised during months of training. There were no windows in the sides, just two small porthole-like windows and a larger rendezvous window that would be essential for docking manoeuvres. When the spacecraft was oriented properly, these windows would provide breathtaking views of Earth, the Moon, and the star-filled void between worlds. The service module, attached to the back of the command module like a cylindrical backpack, contained the large engine needed to escape Earth orbit and enter lunar orbit, plus all the consumables that would keep the crew alive. Fuel cells generated electricity by combining hydrogen and oxygen, producing pure water as a byproduct, an elegant solution that provided both power and drinking water for the journey. The service module also contained the large heat radiator needed to keep all the electronic systems cool in the temperature extremes of space, where the sunny side of the spacecraft could reach 250 degrees Fahrenheit, while the shadowed side dropped to minus 250 degrees. Managing heat in space is like trying to cool a house that has no air conditioning and sits alternately in blazing sunlight and Arctic shadow. Together, the command and service modules formed what NASA called the CSM, the core vehicle that would serve as home base for the entire mission. It would be their bedroom, kitchen, bathroom, office, and observatory, all in one, a self-contained world carrying them across the cosmic ocean. But perhaps the most remarkable vehicle was a third component, the lunar module, or LM. This was humanity's first true spacecraft, designed to operate only in the vacuum of space and on the airless surface of the Moon. Unlike every other flying machine humans had built up to that point, the lunar module would never feel the touch of Earth's atmosphere or the pull of our planet's full gravity. The LM looked like nothing else in aviation, a spider-like collection of struts, tanks, and angular surfaces that seemed almost alien. Its design was dictated purely by function rather than aesthetics. Since it would never encounter air resistance, it didn't need to be streamlined. Since it would operate only in the gentle gravity of space and the Moon, it could be built surprisingly light and delicate. Picture a machine that looks like it was assembled from gold foil, wire, and determination. The LM's skin was so thin that an astronaut could put his fist through it if he wasn't careful. The windows were tiny, triangular portholes. There were no seats. The astronauts would stand throughout the landing and takeoff, held in place by cables and straps like mountain climbers, rappelling down a cliff. The lunar module was really two spacecraft stacked on top of each other. The descent stage, with its large octagonal fuel tanks and wide landing legs, was designed to carry the crew safely to the lunar surface and serve as their launching pad when it was time to leave. The ascent stage, perched on top like a geometric insect, would blast them back to lunar orbit when their exploration was complete. Every gram of weight had been carefully considered. Engineers had removed everything that wasn't absolutely essential. There was no backup engine for landing, no ejection seats, no extra supplies beyond the bare minimum needed for survival. It was a machine built for one purpose: to get two humans to the Moon's surface and back to lunar orbit as safely and efficiently as possible. The entire Apollo spacecraft stack rode to space atop the most powerful rocket ever successfully flown, the Saturn V. This magnificent machine was a testament to the ambition and engineering skill of the 1960s. 363 feet tall, taller than the Statue of Liberty, and weighing 6.2 million pounds when fully fueled. Standing next to a Saturn V on the launch pad was like standing at the base of a 36-story skyscraper, except this skyscraper was designed to leap off the ground and hurl itself toward the moon. The first stage alone contained enough fuel to power a small city: 203,000 gallons of kerosene and 318,000 gallons of liquid oxygen, all of which would be consumed in just 2.5 minutes of thunderous operation. The Saturn V was a 3-stage rocket, each stage designed to operate when the previous stage had exhausted its fuel and been discarded. Think of it as a cosmic relay race, with each stage carrying the baton a little farther and a little faster before passing it on. The first stage would burn for about 2.5 minutes, lifting the entire stack away from Earth and up to an altitude of about 40 miles, where the air becomes thin enough that the upper stages can operate efficiently. The second stage would then ignite, burning for 6 minutes and accelerating the remaining spacecraft to orbital velocity, fast enough to circle Earth every 90 minutes. Finally, the third stage would place them in a parking orbit around Earth and later provide the final push needed to escape Earth's gravity and head toward the Moon. The engineering challenges involved in building the Saturn V were immense, like trying to construct a controlled explosion that could be precisely guided across 250,000 miles of space. The rocket had over 3 million parts, and every one of them had to work perfectly. The engines had to produce precisely the right amount of thrust, burning fuel at exactly the right rate. The guidance system had to steer the rocket with incredible accuracy while dealing with the tremendous dynamic forces of flight. Perhaps most remarkably, the Saturn V had an almost perfect safety record. Of the 13 Saturn V rockets that flew, only one experienced a significant failure: Apollo 6, an uncrewed test flight where some engines shut down early, but the mission still achieved most of its objectives. When human lives were on the line, the Saturn V performed flawlessly mission after mission, a testament to the careful engineering and exhaustive testing that went into its development. But the complexity of the Apollo spacecraft extended far beyond the hardware. The mission required precise coordination between the spacecraft and a global network of tracking stations scattered across 3 continents. As the crew travelled to the Moon, their radio signals would be received by enormous dish antennas in California, Spain, and Australia, ensuring that NASA could maintain contact with the astronauts, no matter where Earth's rotation carried the United States. These tracking stations were engineering marvels in their own right. The largest antennas were 210 feet across, large enough to park several jumbo jets inside. They could detect radio signals so weak that the total energy received during the entire Apollo program was less than the energy in a single snowflake hitting the ground. Yet these whisper-faint signals carried the voices of astronauts speaking from another world. The spacecraft's computer system, though primitive by today's standards, was revolutionary for its time. The Apollo guidance computer was one of the first computers to use integrated circuits, the technology that would eventually lead to modern microprocessors. It weighed 70 pounds and was programmed using a special language that allowed the astronauts to navigate to the Moon using star sightings and carefully timed engine burns. The computer could store only small amounts of information, less than a single photograph on a modern smartphone. Many calculations had to be done by hand using slide rules and printed charts, tools that seem almost medieval compared to modern technology. Yet this primitive system was accurate enough to guide a spacecraft across 250,000 miles of space and land it within walking distance of its target. Navigation in space requires thinking in 3 dimensions and planning for the effects of gravity from multiple celestial bodies. To reach the moon, the spacecraft couldn't simply point at where the moon was when they launched. They had to aim for where the moon would be 3 days later, like a quarterback throwing a pass to where a receiver will be rather than where he is at the moment of release. The trajectory to the moon was carefully planned to provide what engineers called a free return profile. If the spacecraft's main engine failed to work properly, the ship would automatically swing around the moon and return to Earth without requiring any additional engine burns. This built-in safety feature meant that even a major system failure wouldn't necessarily doom the crew. The laws of physics themselves would bring them home. Life support for the week-long journey presented its own set of elegant challenges. The spacecraft had to carry enough oxygen, water and food for 3 men for more than 8 days, while also removing carbon dioxide from the cabin air and managing waste heat from all the electrical systems. The environmental control system was essentially a miniature version of Earth's atmosphere, carefully maintained inside a small metal capsule travelling through the vacuum of space. The air in the spacecraft was constantly circulated through filters that removed carbon dioxide and odours. Water was carefully recycled. Every drop was precious when you're hundreds of thousands of miles from the nearest source. Even the heat generated by the astronauts' bodies and the electronic equipment had to be carefully managed, radiated away into the cold depths of space through specialized heat exchangers. Food for the journey was specially prepared to minimize weight and eliminate crumbs that could float around the cabin in weightlessness and potentially clog air filters or get into sensitive equipment. Meals came in plastic pouches that could be rehydrated with water or eaten dry. The menu wasn't gourmet, but it provided proper nutrition for men doing the most demanding job in human history. The astronauts themselves had to be prepared for the psychological challenges of the mission. They would spend days in a space smaller than most bathrooms, unable to shower, eating specially prepared foods, and dealing with the strange sensations of weightlessness, where up and down became meaningless concepts. Sleep would be challenging. There were no beds in the spacecraft, just sleeping bags that could be attached to the cabin walls. The astronauts would take turns sleeping while their crewmates monitored the spacecraft systems and maintained their course toward the moon. Even in sleep, they would be traveling at thousands of miles per hour through the cosmic void, farther from home than humans had ever been. Perhaps most remarkably, all of this technology, the powerful rockets, the sophisticated spacecraft, the global tracking network, was developed using 1960s engineering techniques. There were no computer-aided design systems, no advanced material science, no modern manufacturing techniques. Everything was done with slide rules, hand calculations, and the careful application of basic physics principles understood since Newton's time. The fact that it worked at all is a testament to the skill and dedication of the hundreds of thousands of people who contributed to the Apollo program. Engineers and technicians working 16-hour days, seamstresses who hand-stitched spacesuits with the precision of watchmakers, mathematicians who calculated trajectories using nothing but pencil and paper, test pilots who risked their lives proving that the systems would work. All of them were part of the team that would make the impossible journey possible. As the launch date approached, the 3 astronauts of Apollo 11 were as ready as human beings could be for such an unprecedented journey. They had trained for every conceivable problem, studied their spacecraft until operating it became as natural as driving a familiar car, and prepared themselves mentally for the adventure that lay ahead. They were about to become the first humans to leave Earth's gravitational neighborhood and travel to another world, carrying with them the hopes and dreams of everyone who had ever looked up at the moon, and wondered what it would be like to walk on its surface. Their spacecraft was ready, their training was complete, and their courage was absolute. The stage was set, the cosmic ship was prepared, and 3 brave explorers were ready to take humanity's first steps into the infinite ocean of space that surrounds our small blue world. In just a few days, they would climb aboard their mechanical marvel and ride a controlled explosion toward the moon, beginning a journey that would change forever how humans see themselves and their place in the universe. On the morning of July 16th, 1969, 3 men entered an elevator that would take them to the top of a 363-foot rocket, knowing that in a few hours they would either be on their way to the moon or, well, they preferred not to think about the alternatives. The launch day routine had an almost ritual quality to it. Medical checks, final equipment inspections, the careful process of putting on spacesuits and walking to the launch pad, where their Saturn V rocket waited like a white cathedral against the Florida sky. Picture that early morning, the rocket standing tall in the pre-dawn darkness, bathed in spotlights that made it glow like a beacon. Around the launch pad, thousands of people had gathered on beaches and rooftops, some driving all night just to witness this moment. Families spread blankets on the sand, children pointing up at the distant rocket, everyone united by the same sense of wonder and anticipation. As Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin and Michael Collins settled into their seats atop 6 million pounds of rocket fuel, an estimated 1 million people watched from the Florida coastline. It was like the world's largest outdoor theatre, with everyone looking toward the same stage, waiting for the same incredible performance to begin. At 9:32 a.m. Eastern Time, the 5 first-stage engines of the Saturn V ignited with a controlled explosion that could be felt for miles. The rocket lifted slowly at first, surprisingly gently when you watch old films of the launch, rising on a pillar of flame that painted the morning sky with orange and gold. Inside the command module, the astronauts felt the building rumble and vibration as their spacecraft came alive beneath them. The ride was smoother than they had expected, more like being in a very fast elevator than being shot from a cannon. As the rocket climbed through Earth's atmosphere, they could feel the stages separating below them, each one doing its job before falling away into the ocean. When the engines finally shut off and they reached orbit, something magical happened. Suddenly, everything that had been pressed down by the rocket's acceleration began to float. Pencils drifted through the air. Water formed perfect spheres. The astronauts themselves floated gently in their seats, held in place only by their restraint straps. For the next hour and a half, they circled Earth while Mission Control checked every system. Through their small windows, they watched the world roll by beneath them. Blue oceans, white clouds, and the thin line of atmosphere that protects all life on our planet. Earth looked so peaceful from up there, so unified and beautiful. When everything checked out perfectly, they received the call they'd been waiting for. Apollo 11, you are go for trans-lunar injection. The 3rd stage engine fired one more time, pushing them faster and faster until they reached the magical speed needed to escape Earth's gravitational embrace, 25,000 miles per hour. And then they were free, sailing across the cosmic ocean toward the moon. The journey to the moon takes about 3 days, and those 3 days were unlike anything humans had ever experienced. They were traveling faster than anyone in history, yet the spacecraft felt perfectly still and peaceful. There was no sensation of speed, just the gentle awareness that they were coasting through the infinite dark between worlds. One of the most profound moments came as they watched Earth shrink behind them. What had always been the world, everything they'd ever known, slowly became just one world among many, a beautiful blue marble hanging in the cosmic dark. Armstrong later said it was like watching your house disappear behind you as you set off on the longest journey imaginable. Each day brought its own rhythm aboard the small spacecraft. The astronauts took turns sleeping, eating, and monitoring their systems. They would wake to find Earth a little smaller in their windows, the Moon a little larger. Meals came from plastic pouches, not exactly gourmet dining, but nourishing enough for 3 explorers crossing the void between worlds. Sleep in weightlessness was an adventure in itself. Without gravity to hold them down, the astronauts had to zip themselves into sleeping bags attached to the cabin walls. Some described it as peaceful, like floating in a warm pool under starlight. Others found it strange to sleep without knowing which way was up or down. The daily routine had an oddly domestic quality, despite taking place in the most extraordinary circumstances imaginable. They would check their instruments, take star sightings for navigation, and chat with mission control back on Earth. Sometimes they would just float by the windows, watching the cosmic scenery drift by, Earth behind them, the Moon ahead, and all around them the infinite star-filled dark of deep space. As they approached the Moon, everything changed. What had been a distant flat disk in their windows slowly revealed itself as a real world with mountains and valleys, ancient craters and vast dusty plains. The Moon grew from a bright light to a horizon, then to a landscape that filled their view completely. On July 19th, they fired their main engine to slow down and slip into lunar orbit. This was another moment of truth. If the engine had failed, they would have shot past the Moon and into deep space with no way home. But everything worked perfectly, and suddenly they found themselves circling another world, 70 miles above a landscape that no human had ever seen up close. From lunar orbit, they could see the Moon's surface in stunning detail. It was a world of light and shadow, with crater walls rising thousands of feet into the black sky, and ancient lava flows creating smooth, dark plains. There was something both beautiful and lonely about the lunar landscape, magnificent in its stark simplicity, yet utterly lifeless and silent. Michael Collins orbited alone while Armstrong and Aldrin prepared for their descent. Every 2 hours he passed over the landing site, sometimes able to talk with his crewmates, sometimes disappearing behind the Moon into complete radio silence. During those periods, he was the most isolated human being in the universe, farther from help than anyone had ever been. But Collins never felt lonely. He had important work to do, maintaining the command module that would carry them all home, taking photographs of the surface below, and preparing for the moment when he would need to rescue his crewmates from the lunar surface. He was the guardian of their only way home. After a day in lunar orbit, Armstrong and Aldrin transferred into the lunar module, that strange, spider-like craft that would carry them to the surface. The 2 spacecraft separated with a gentle push, and the lunar module began its powered descent toward the Moon. This was the moment everyone had been working toward, the actual landing on another world. As they descended, Armstrong realized their computer was guiding them toward a field of boulders that would make landing impossible. With fuel running low, he took manual control and flew the lunar module like a helicopter, searching for a safe spot to land. With less than 30 seconds of fuel remaining, Armstrong found a smooth area and gently set the lunar module down. His famous words, "The Eagle has landed," told the world that humans had successfully reached the surface of another celestial body. The landing site was perfectly quiet. There was no wind, no weather, no sound except what they could hear through their spacecraft's hull. Outside their windows, the Moon's surface stretched away under the black sky, lit by the bright, unfiltered light of the sun. Earth hung overhead like a blue jewel. the only splash of colour in an otherwise black and white world. For a few moments, Armstrong and Aldrin simply sat in their small cabin, absorbing the magnitude of what they had accomplished. They were farther from home than any humans in history, sitting on the surface of another world, surrounded by a silence that had remained unbroken for billions of years. The view from their windows was breathtaking. Rolling hills of grey dust stretched to the horizon, dotted with rocks and boulders. Everything was sharp and clear in the airless environment. Distant mountains looked as crisp as nearby stones. It was a landscape of ancient beauty, untouched by wind or rain, or any of the forces that constantly reshape Earth's surface. After a brief rest and their first meal on another world, Armstrong and Aldrin prepared for humanity's first walk on the Moon. The process took several hours as they checked their spacesuits, prepared their scientific equipment, and went through lengthy checklists. Each spacesuit was like a personal spacecraft, designed to keep them alive in the vacuum and extreme temperatures of the lunar surface. As they prepared to open the hatch, both men understood they were about to cross a threshold in human history. Outside their door lay a world that had waited patiently for billions of years for its first visitors. Soon they would become the first Earth creatures to walk on another world, carrying with them the dreams and hopes of everyone who had ever looked up at the Moon and wondered what it would be like to visit. The moment was approaching when humanity would take its first steps into the cosmic ocean, proving that our species was no longer bound to a single world. Two explorers were about to walk where no life had ever walked, in a place so quiet and still that their footprints would remain undisturbed for millions of years to come. Meanwhile, 240,000 miles away, Earth continued its gentle rotation, with people around the world gathered around television sets and radios, waiting to witness the moment when humans would first touch another world. Children stayed up past their bedtimes, families gathered in living rooms, and strangers stood together on street corners, all united by the extraordinary knowledge that members of their species were about to walk on the Moon. The spacecraft sat quietly on the lunar surface, a small island of life and warmth in the vast, ancient silence of another world. Inside, two explorers made their final preparations to step outside and begin humanity's first exploration of a place beyond Earth. The cosmic ocean that had separated worlds for billions of years was about to welcome its first travelers from the small blue planet that hung like a distant star in the Moon's black sky. Human footprints were about to mark the surface of another world, beginning a new chapter in the long story of exploration that had carried our species from the first steps out of Africa to the first steps on the Moon. The door was about to open on the greatest adventure in human history, a gentle walk across the surface of another world that would change forever how we see ourselves and our place in the infinite cosmos that surrounds our small, precious Earth. The Moon has no atmosphere, no wind, no weather. There are no raindrops to smooth away the tracks, no gusts of wind to fill them with dust. The footprints left by the Apollo astronauts are as sharp and clear today as they were more than 50 years ago, and they will remain that way for millions of years into the future. In a strange way, they represent some of the most permanent human artifacts ever created. At 10:56 p.m. Eastern Time on July 20th, 1969, Neil Armstrong opened the lunar module's hatch and became the first human being to set foot on another world. Picture that moment. A small door opening on a spacecraft sitting in perfect silence, and then a figure in a white spacesuit carefully climbing down a ladder into a landscape that had never known the touch of life. Armstrong's first words from another world were surprisingly practical. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. He later said he had intended to say, "one small step for a man," but in the excitement of the moment, the word got lost. It didn't matter. Everyone who heard those words understood they were witnessing history being made. The first thing Armstrong noticed was how easily he moved in the moon's gentle gravity. On Earth, he weighed about 165 pounds. On the moon, he weighed just 27 pounds. Every step felt light and bouncy, like walking on a trampoline. When he took his first experimental steps, he seemed to float rather than walk, his feet hanging in the low gravity longer than seemed possible. 19 minutes later, Buzz Aldrin joined Armstrong on the surface, describing the landscape around them as magnificent desolation, a phrase that perfectly captured the stark beauty of the lunar environment. Together, the two astronauts found themselves in a world unlike anything they had trained for, despite months of preparation. The lunar landscape stretched away from their small craft in gentle rolling hills covered with fine, powdery dust. The soil, what scientists call regolith, had been ground to powder by billions of years of meteorite impacts, creating a surface that sparkled in the sunlight like crushed glass. When they walked, their boots sank about an inch into this soft layer, but underneath was surprisingly firm ground. Everything around them was rendered in stark black and white. The sun blazed overhead in a sky so black it seemed to absorb light. Shadows were completely dark. There was no air to scatter sunlight and fill them with the soft blue glow we're used to on Earth. When Armstrong stepped into shadow, he disappeared almost completely until his eyes adjusted to the darkness. The silence was profound in a way that's impossible to experience on Earth. With no atmosphere to carry sound, the only things they could hear were their own breathing, their heart rates, and the mechanical sounds of their life support systems humming inside their spacesuits. When they spoke to each other, their voices traveled by radio rather than through air. But despite the alien environment, both astronauts found the moon surprisingly welcoming. The landscape felt solid and stable under their feet. The lack of weather meant perfect visibility in all directions. They could see for miles across the lunar plains, with distant mountains standing sharp and clear against the black sky. Every movement had a dreamlike quality in the low gravity. When Armstrong dropped his hammer, it fell slowly and gently, taking much longer to reach the ground than it would have on Earth. When Aldrin jumped, he seemed to hang in the air like a slow-motion film. They quickly learned to move with a bouncing, kangaroo-like gait that was perfectly suited to their new environment. The work they accomplished during their brief stay was remarkable. They had only 2.5 hours outside their spacecraft, but they made every minute count. Using specially designed tools, they collected 47 pounds of lunar rocks and soil, carefully documenting each specimen and photographing it in place before adding it to their collection bags. The rocks they gathered were treasures beyond price, pieces of another world that would tell scientists the story of the moon's formation and the early history of the solar system. Some were ancient basalts formed when lava flows covered parts of the moon billions of years ago. Others were breccias, rocks that had been shattered and fused back together by the tremendous forces of meteorite impacts. Each sample was like a page from a history book written in stone, describing events that happened when the solar system was young and violent. The moon had preserved these stories in its airless environment, keeping them safe for billions of years until human explorers could finally come to read them. They deployed scientific instruments that would continue working long after they left. A seismometer to detect moonquakes and meteorite impacts. A laser reflector, essentially a sophisticated mirror that would allow scientists on Earth to measure the distance to the moon with incredible precision by bouncing laser beams off its surface. But perhaps their most important task was simply to prove that humans could work effectively on another world. Everything they did, walking, picking up rocks, deploying equipment, taking photographs, demonstrated that space exploration was not just possible, but practical. Humans could adapt to alien environments and accomplish meaningful work there. Meanwhile, Michael Collins orbited overhead in the command module, keeping their ticket home safe and ready. Every 2 hours he passed over the landing site during his orbit around the Moon. For brief moments, he could talk with Armstrong and Aldrin on the surface. But for most of each orbit, especially when he passed behind the Moon, Collins was completely alone. During those periods of isolation, Collins was the most isolated human in the universe. He was farther from help than anyone had ever been, cut off from all contact with both his crewmates and Earth. Yet he later wrote that he felt no loneliness during these times, only pride and anticipation. He knew his job was to keep the command module ready for the return journey. Collins spent his solo time taking photographs of the lunar surface, monitoring spacecraft systems, and marveling at the view from his windows. He had a unique perspective on the Moon. He could see both the landing site where his crewmates were working and the far side of the Moon that no human had ever seen directly. He was simultaneously the most isolated person in the universe and one of the most privileged. Down on the surface, Armstrong and Aldrin worked methodically through their checklist of activities. They planted an American flag, though they knew the flag would probably be bleached white by solar radiation within a few years. They left a plaque that read, "Here men from the planet Earth first set foot upon the Moon July 1969 AD. We came in peace for all mankind." The message was important. While the mission was an American achievement, Armstrong and Aldrin understood they were representing all of humanity in this historic moment. Their footprints belonged not just to their country, but to the entire human species, proof that our kind had finally broken free from the gravitational bonds of our home planet. As their surface activities came to an end, Armstrong and Aldrin faced something no human had ever experienced before, preparing to leave a world where no one had ever been. They packed their samples and equipment, took a final look around their landing site, and climbed back into their small cabin. The lunar module had been their home on another world, a tiny island of life and warmth in the vast silence of the Moon. As they prepared for takeoff, they knew they were about to become the first humans to launch from the surface of another world, to leave one celestial body and travel to another. The takeoff was unlike any takeoff in human experience. There was no atmosphere to provide the familiar rush of air, no gravity strong enough to press them into their seats. The ascent stage of the lunar module simply rose gently away from the surface, accelerating slowly as it climbed toward orbital velocity. Through their small windows, they watched their landing site fall away below them, growing smaller until it was just another crater in the vast lunar landscape. But their footprints remained behind, perfectly preserved in the airless environment. Those tracks in the dust represent something profound about human nature. Our irrepressible urge to explore, to push beyond known boundaries, to leave our mark on new worlds. They are evidence that humans were here, that we reached across 250,000 miles of space and walked on another world. The footprints also carry a message about permanence and legacy. On Earth, human artifacts are constantly being worn away by weather, covered by vegetation, or destroyed by geological processes. But on the Moon, those footprints will outlast civilization itself. Long after the last human city has crumbled, long after our species has either expanded to the stars or gone extinct, those footprints will remain exactly as they are today. There's something both humbling and inspiring about that permanence. The Apollo footprints had become humanity's first archaeological site on another world, a frozen moment in time that captures the exact state of our technology and aspirations in July 1969. Future visitors to the Apollo landing sites will find them exactly as the astronauts left them. The American flags, probably bleached white by decades of unfiltered solar radiation, the scientific instruments, the descent stages of the lunar modules, and yes, those famous footprints all preserved in the Moon's museum-like environment. In that sense, the Apollo landing sites are like time capsules from 1969, preserving not just the hardware, but the spirit of an era when humanity dared to dream of reaching other worlds. They remind us that some human achievements transcend the ordinary boundaries of time, that occasionally our species does something so significant that it becomes part of the permanent record of the universe. But perhaps most importantly, those footprints point not backward to what we have accomplished, but forward to what we might yet achieve. Armstrong and Aldrin were not the last humans to walk on other worlds. They were the first. Their footprints are an invitation to future generations to continue the journey, to make their own tracks on the Moon and Mars and worlds we haven't yet imagined. The regolith that holds those footprints has been undisturbed for over half a century now, waiting patiently in the lunar silence. Each track is perfect in its detail, showing not just the shape of the astronauts' boots, but even the tread patterns and manufacturing marks. They are proof that humans were here, that we touched another world with our own hands and feet. Every time we look up at the Moon, we can remember that human footprints mark its surface. Our species has already taken the first steps into the cosmic ocean that surrounds our small blue world. And in remembering that achievement, we might find the inspiration to take the next steps, to continue the journey that began with those first tentative footprints in the lunar dust. The Moon keeps those footprints safe for us, preserving them in its gentle gravity and airless silence. They wait there still, exactly as Armstrong and Aldrin left them, reminding us that the boundaries of human exploration are limited only by our imagination and our willingness to work together toward impossible dreams. In the vast silence of the lunar landscape, those footprints remain, small marks in cosmic dust that represent the giant leap of an entire species reaching beyond the confines of a single world and stepping into the infinite possibilities of space. After their historic moonwalk, Armstrong and Aldrin faced a challenge that no human had ever encountered before, leaving another world to return home. The ascent from the Moon was perhaps the most critical moment of the entire mission, because there was no backup plan. The small engine in the upper stage of the lunar module had to work perfectly, or the two astronauts would be stranded on the Moon with no possibility of rescue. Picture that moment of takeoff from another world. After 21 hours and 36 minutes on the lunar surface, it was time to leave their temporary home on the Moon. The ascent stage had a single engine, no backup, no second chance. If it failed to ignite, Armstrong and Aldrin would spend the rest of their lives on the Moon, with Earth hanging overhead like a blue reminder of the world they could never reach again. But the engine fired flawlessly, and for the first time in history, humans launched from the surface of another world. The takeoff felt almost magical. Instead of the violent acceleration they had experienced leaving Earth, the lunar module lifted gently away from the surface, rising on a pillar of flame that was invisible in the airless environment. Through their small windows, they watched their landing site fall away below them. The place where they had walked and worked, where they had planted a flag and collected rocks from another world, grew smaller and smaller until it was just another mark on the ancient lunar landscape. But their footprints remained behind, preserved forever in the airless silence. The rendezvous with Michael Collins in the command module was like a carefully choreographed dance performed in the vacuum of space. The two spacecraft found each other in lunar orbit and docked with a gentle bump that marked the reunion of the crew. Collins, who had waited patiently in orbit for over 20 hours, welcomed his crewmates back with quiet joy and relief. The transfer of the lunar samples was a moment of particular care. Those 47 pounds of moon rocks represented the scientific treasure of the entire mission. Pieces of another world that would help scientists understand the formation of the solar system. Each sample bag was carefully moved from the lunar module to the command module, precious cargo that had travelled farther than any rocks in history. Once the samples and equipment were safely transferred, the astronauts bid farewell to the lunar module that had carried them to the surface and back. The small spacecraft that had been their home on another world was pushed away to crash back onto the moon's surface a few hours later, its job complete. After 30 hours in lunar orbit, it was time to come home. The service module engine fired one final time, accelerating the command module out of lunar orbit and onto a trajectory that would bring them back to Earth. Unlike the outbound journey, this time they were travelling downhill, pulled by Earth's gravity toward a safe landing in the Pacific Ocean. The return journey took another 3 days, but these 3 days felt different from the outbound trip. The most dangerous parts of the mission were behind them. They had accomplished something that seemed impossible just a decade earlier, and they were bringing with them not just lunar samples and scientific data, but a completely new perspective on humanity's place in the cosmos. As Earth grew larger in their windows day by day, the astronauts had time to reflect on what they had experienced. They had seen their home planet from the perspective of deep space, had walked on another world, and had witnessed sights that no human had ever seen before. They were returning as different people than when they had left, not just because of what they had accomplished, but because of what they had seen. The growing view of Earth was a welcome sight after the stark landscape of the moon. Where the moon had been all black and white and ancient silence, Earth was a symphony of blue and white and brown and green, alive with swirling clouds and sparkling oceans. It looked like what it was, a world bursting with life, the only oasis of warmth and colour in the cold, cosmic dark they had travelled through. During the return journey, the astronauts spoke with reporters, scientists and their families via radio. The conversations had a dreamlike quality, 3 men floating in a small spacecraft between worlds, describing experiences that no human language had words for. How do you explain to someone what it feels like to walk on another world? How do you describe the silence of the moon or the way Earth looks when you see it whole? The splashdown in the Pacific Ocean on July 24, 1969, was both an ending and a beginning. The command module, blackened by its fiery passage through Earth's atmosphere, bobbed gently on the ocean's swells like a cork. After 8 days of travelling through the airless void of space, the astronauts were surrounded once again by the blue sky and white clouds of their home world. The recovery was swift and well practiced. Navy divers attached a flotation collar to the spacecraft to keep it stable in the water. A helicopter lifted the 3 astronauts to the USS Hornet, where they were immediately placed in quarantine. Scientists weren't entirely sure whether lunar microorganisms might pose a threat to Earth's biosphere, so the astronauts would spend the next 3 weeks in isolation. The quarantine period gave Armstrong, Aldrin and Collins time to process the magnitude of their achievement. They had travelled farther than any humans in history, had walked on another world, and had returned safely with proof of their journey. But perhaps more importantly, they had opened the door to a new era of human exploration. During their isolation, the astronauts could see through their windows that something had changed in the world. Crowds gathered outside their quarantine facility, not just Americans, but people from around the globe who had travelled to see the men who had walked on the moon. The mission had captured the imagination of the entire human species. When the astronauts finally emerged from quarantine on August 10th, they found that they had become symbols of human capability and achievement. Their journey had been watched by an estimated 650 million people around the world, at the time, the largest audience in human history. For a brief, shining moment, the divisions that normally separate nations and cultures seemed less important than the fact that humans had walked on the moon. The global reaction was extraordinary. In cities around the world, people had gathered in public squares to watch the landing on large television screens. Strangers embraced in the streets. Children stayed up past their bedtimes to witness history being made. For once, humanity was united in celebration rather than divided by conflict. The ticker-tape parade in New York City drew 4 million people to the streets, more than had ever gathered for any single event in the city's history. Similar celebrations took place in cities around the world. The astronauts toured more than 20 countries, everywhere greeted as heroes, not just of American achievement, but of human achievement. But the impact of Apollo 11 went far beyond parades and celebrations. The mission had fundamentally changed how humanity saw itself and its place in the universe. The photographs of Earth taken from lunar distance, showing our planet as a small, precious blue marble hanging in the cosmic dark, became some of the most influential images ever captured. For the first time, humans could see their world as it truly is, a small oasis of life in an otherwise empty cosmos. This new perspective contributed to the environmental movement and helped people understand that Earth is not an inexhaustible resource, but a finite, fragile home that must be carefully protected. The scientific impact was equally profound. The lunar samples revolutionized our understanding of the moon's formation and the early history of the solar system. Analysis confirmed that the moon was formed billions of years ago, probably from debris created when a Mars-sized object collided with the early Earth. The rocks also provided new insights into the violent early period when impacts from asteroids and comets were much more common. Each sample told its own story. Some were ancient basalts that formed when lava flows covered parts of the moon 3.7 billion years ago. Others were breccias, rocks that had been shattered and fused back together by tremendous impact forces. One sample, later nicknamed the Genesis Rock, was determined to be 4.4 billion years old, nearly as old as the solar system itself. The technological advances developed for Apollo had benefits far beyond space exploration. The integrated circuits created for the Apollo guidance computer helped accelerate the development of modern computers. The miniaturization techniques needed for spacecraft equipment contributed to advances in electronics. Materials developed for spacesuits and heat shields found applications in everything from firefighting equipment to automotive safety systems. Apollo 11 also demonstrated the power of setting ambitious goals and working systematically to achieve them. Kennedy's challenge to land on the moon before this decade is out had seemed almost impossible in 1961. But by focusing the efforts of hundreds of thousands of people on a single, clearly defined goal, the impossible became achievable. The mission showed that complex problems could be solved through careful planning, systematic engineering, and patient accumulation of knowledge. Each Apollo mission had built upon the lessons learned from previous flights, gradually developing the capabilities needed for the lunar landing. It was a masterclass in project management and the power of human collaboration. The cultural impact may have been even more significant than the scientific contributions. Apollo 11 proved that humans could work together to accomplish extraordinary things, that the boundaries of the possible were much farther out than most people had imagined. It showed that the spirit of exploration and discovery was alive and well in the modern world. The mission established important precedents for space exploration. The astronauts carried a plaque stating they came in peace for all mankind, emphasizing that the achievement belonged not to any single nation, but to the entire human species. They planted an American flag, acknowledging the country that had made the mission possible, but they also left symbols representing all of humanity's hopes for peaceful exploration. Apollo 11 created a template for how humans might explore other worlds, carefully, scientifically, with respect for the environments we visit, and with the understanding that we are representatives of our entire species. It established the principle that space exploration should be conducted openly, with knowledge shared freely with all humanity. The mission also demonstrated that space exploration could be conducted safely, despite enormous risks. The careful engineering, exhaustive testing, and systematic approach to safety that characterized Apollo became the foundation for all subsequent human spaceflight programs. The lessons learned continue to influence how we design spacecraft and plan missions today. As the Apollo 11 astronauts returned to their lives after their historic journey, they carried with them a perspective that few humans have ever experienced. They had seen Earth from space, walked on another world, and participated in one of the most significant achievements in human history. That perspective gave them a deep appreciation for the fragility and preciousness of our home planet. Armstrong returned to a quiet life, teaching engineering and avoiding the spotlight. He understood that he had been chosen by history to take humanity's first steps on another world, but he never sought to capitalize on his fame. Aldrin became an advocate for continued space exploration, writing books and giving speeches about humanity's future in space. Collins wrote eloquently about the experience of seeing Earth from lunar distance and the profound sense of unity it gave him. All three men remained modest about their achievement, always emphasizing that Apollo 11 was the work of hundreds of thousands of people, not just three astronauts. They were the visible representatives of an enormous team effort that included everyone from rocket engineers to seamstresses, from mathematicians to test pilots. The successful return of Apollo 11 marked the end of one chapter in human exploration and the beginning of another. It proved that humans could travel safely to other worlds and return with new knowledge and perspective. It opened the door to further lunar exploration, to eventual missions to Mars and other planets, and to the possibility that humanity's future might extend far beyond Earth. But perhaps most importantly, Apollo 11 reminded us that human beings, despite all our flaws and limitations, are capable of extraordinary things when we work together toward common goals. It showed that the spirit of exploration that has driven our species throughout history is alive and well in the space age. The gentle splashdown in the Pacific Ocean was not really an ending at all. It was a homecoming that marked the beginning of humanity's future as a spacefaring civilization, a future that began with three brave explorers returning from humanity's first visit to another world, bringing with them proof that the cosmic ocean was navigable and that other shores were waiting to welcome human footprints. Their return to Earth carried a message of hope and possibility that continues to inspire us today. They had touched another world and come home safely, proving that the boundaries of human achievement are limited only by our imagination, our courage, and our willingness to work together toward dreams that seem impossible until the moment they become reality. And so, our gentle journey through Apollo's peaceful legacy brings us back to where we started, here on Earth, looking up at the same moon that welcomed human visitors more than half a century ago, but now with a deeper appreciation for what that achievement means and how it continues to inspire us today. That bright orb hanging in tonight's sky isn't just a beautiful celestial companion anymore. It's a world that humans have walked upon, a place where our species left the first footprints on another planet, a destination that proved our dreams of reaching beyond Earth could become reality through courage, ingenuity, and peaceful cooperation. Tonight, we've travelled together from the early dreams of touching the moon through the incredible engineering achievement that made those dreams possible. We've followed 3 brave explorers on their 8-day journey through the cosmic ocean, walked with them in the lunar dust, and discovered how their achievement changed not just our understanding of space exploration, but our perspective on what it means to be human in an infinite universe. When you look up at the moon now, you can see it with new eyes. Those dark patches that ancient peoples saw as seas are actually vast plains of solidified lava, formed billions of years ago when the moon was still geologically active. The bright rays extending from some craters are streams of material thrown out by asteroid impacts, creating patterns that tell stories of cosmic collisions from the solar system's violent youth. Somewhere in these patterns of light and shadow, in a place called the Sea of Tranquility, sits the lower half of a small spacecraft. Its gold-coloured skin reflects sunlight during the lunar day and radiates heat into the cosmic cold during the 2-week lunar night. Nearby, an American flag stands in the airless silence, probably bleached white now by decades of unfiltered solar radiation. And there, preserved in dust finer than flour, are the footprints of Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin. Perfect impressions that show not just the shape of their boots, but the tread patterns, the manufacturing marks, even the way the dust compressed under their weight in the gentle lunar gravity. Those tracks have remained undisturbed for over 50 years, and they will remain exactly as they are for millions of years to come. The moon keeps those footprints safe for us, like a museum curator protecting humanity's most precious artifacts. In the airless environment, there is no wind to blur the edges, no rain to wash them away, no geological forces to disturb them. They wait there in the eternal silence, proof that humans once walked on another world. But Apollo's legacy extends far beyond those footprints. The mission taught us that the boundaries of human achievement are much further out than we usually imagine. It showed us that when people work together toward a common goal, when they combine their skills and knowledge and determination, they can accomplish things that seem impossible. The technologies developed for Apollo didn't stay in space. They came back to Earth and improved life for everyone. The miniaturized computers that guided the spacecraft to the moon led to the development of personal computers that changed how we work and communicate. The materials created for spacesuits found their way into protective equipment for firefighters and racing drivers. The techniques for purifying water and air in spacecraft now help provide clean resources for communities around the world. But perhaps the most important gift of Apollo was the perspective it gave us. For the first time, humans could see Earth as it truly is, not a collection of separate countries and continents, but a single unified world floating in the cosmic dark. The photographs of Earth taken from lunar distance became symbols of environmental awareness, reminding us that our planet is a precious, fragile oasis that deserves our protection. The astronauts who saw Earth from space often spoke of a feeling they called the overview effect, a profound shift in awareness that comes from seeing our world from that cosmic perspective. They described Earth as looking small and fragile and infinitely precious, a blue marble that contains everything we've ever known and loved. That perspective changed how they thought about borders and conflicts and the things that divide us here on Earth. From space, there are no national boundaries visible, no walls or fences marking where one country ends and another begins. There's just one beautiful world, turning slowly in the sunlight, home to all of us. Apollo 11 also reminded us that exploration is one of humanity's finest qualities. The same curiosity that led our ancestors to cross oceans and climb mountains and explore new continents carried Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins across the void between worlds. The spirit of exploration that has driven our species throughout history found its ultimate expression in those first steps on lunar soil. The mission proved that space exploration could be conducted peacefully, for the benefit of all humanity rather than the advantage of any single nation. The plaque left on the moon declared that the astronauts came in peace for all mankind, and that spirit of peaceful exploration continues to guide human activities in space today. Every time a new spacecraft launches, every time we send robotic explorers to distant planets, every time we discover something new about our universe, we're continuing the journey that began with Apollo. The International Space Station orbiting overhead is a direct descendant of Apollo's legacy, a place where astronauts from many nations work together in the peaceful exploration of space. The technologies being developed today for return trips to the Moon and eventual journeys to Mars build upon the foundation laid by Apollo. The lessons learned from those early missions continue to guide how we design spacecraft, train astronauts, and plan for the challenges of long-duration spaceflight. But Apollo's most lasting legacy may be the inspiration it provides to new generations of explorers and dreamers. Children who learn about the moon landing often become interested in science and engineering, drawn by the same sense of wonder and possibility that motivated the Apollo team. Teachers use the story of Apollo to show students that with hard work, creativity, and determination, they can achieve things that seem impossible. As we look toward the future, Apollo reminds us that we are a spacefaring species. The Earth is not a prison but a launching pad for further exploration. Other worlds are waiting for human footprints. Mars, with its ancient riverbeds and polar ice caps, beckons as the next destination for human explorers. The moons of Jupiter and Saturn, with their hidden oceans and exotic chemistries, offer the possibility of discovering life beyond Earth. The children listening to this story tonight may be the ones who take those next steps. They may be the first to walk on Mars, the first to explore the ice caves of Europa, the first to establish permanent human settlements beyond Earth. Apollo showed us that such dreams are not fantasy, but future history waiting to be written. Tonight, as you prepare for sleep, you can look up at the moon with the knowledge that you belong to the same species that dared to touch another world. You carry within you the same curiosity and courage that drove those early space explorers to leave Earth's comfortable embrace and venture into the unknown. The moon shining in your window is no longer an unreachable destination, but a place where humans have been, where we've left our mark, where we've proven that the cosmic ocean is navigable and other shores are waiting to welcome us. Those footprints in the lunar dust belong to all of us, reminding us that we are explorers by nature, dreamers and builders, and reacher toward impossible things. Apollo's legacy belongs to you, carried forward in every moment when you look up at the stars and wonder what's out there. In every time you refuse to accept that something is impossible, in every instance when you choose cooperation over conflict and curiosity over fear. Sweet dreams under Apollo's moon, carried gently through the night by the same spirit of exploration that took humanity to another world and brought us safely home again. May your rest be as peaceful as the lunar surface, and as filled with wonder as that moment when humans first walked among the stars. The moon will be there when you wake up tomorrow and the next day, and for all the days of your life. And every time you see it, you can remember that human footprints mark its surface, that our species has already begun the journey into the cosmic ocean that surrounds our small blue world. Until our next journey through the cosmos, this is the Sleepy Astronomer, wishing you clear skies and gentle dreams beneath the moon that welcomed our species with open arms and waits patiently for our return, keeping safe the footprints that prove we were there, that we reached across the void and touched another world, and that we will surely go back again someday.